about to leave. Already packing, come with me. I'm not.
Hello friends and enemies, welcome back to Happy for Now. I decided I wanted pixie dust on my face. Maybe got a little carried away, but I hope you enjoy my sparkles. And I'm here to talk about fantasy romance. I've always been a pretty big fantasy romance reader, and I wanted to give you all some recs and talk about some books on my radar because a fantasy romance February is happening, and I plan to read a lot of fantasy romance next month, if my mood agrees. As always, I am a bit of a mood reader, but I do honestly enjoy fantasy romance immensely, so I can't wait to dive into some of these picks on my radar. But first up, what is fantasy romance? To me, fantasy romance are things that blend the fantastical worlds of fairies and maybe a little bit of like magic system stuff, and that I think of when I think about like fantasy books. And it can blur the line a little with like some urban fantasies, like maybe Alona Andrews' Hidden Legacy is a little bit fantasy romance, but not because it's more urban settings. And usually to me, a fantasy book or a fantasy romance specifically is going to have a setting that is not Earth the whole time. That's the way I'm handling it. Maybe my definition's wrong, who knows? That's just my preference. So let's talk about it. I, of course, have read quite a few fantasy romances over the years, and I just want to talk about some of the ones I really, really liked. Some of these are going to be ones that we hear about all the time, and some of them are going to be ones maybe you haven't heard of yet. So first of all, we have A Heart of Blood and Ashes by Milla Vane, which honestly reignited my love of fantasy romance. This book reads like a high fantasy book in the beginning, okay? It is world building heavy. So go in with that expectation so you're not too disappointed. I know some people were thrown by how heavy the world building is, especially for a romance, but I was thrilled by it. I love good world building. So Maddox and Yavin are our main characters. Maddox is leading his band of warriors into a battle, and he captures Yavin, who is the last in line of these warrior queens, but she appears very weak and frail and is not capable of these things. And there's a lot of banter. There's some threats of cutting her tongue out if she doesn't stop talking about somebody. It's a lot. It's a lot. He's a very alpha male, and I love it. I live for it. I cannot wait to reread this, the novella and the whole series in one go. I love Yavin though as a character. Honestly, I fell so hard for her because she is not strong physically, but her strength and fortitude in like mental and like planning strategery fun times, like those sort of situations, is out of this world. She is so smart in how she handles Maddox and what she does in this book. Absolutely delightful. There are no dragons in the first book, at least. The dragons are just his like group of warriors. So FYI, I was a little sad. I thought there might be dragons. There weren't. Then I want to talk about, I think, also another classic fantasy romance author who is Grace Draven. I have been reading Grace Draven since about 2013 or 12, somewhere in there. It's been a while. I haven't read all of her books yet, but I did start with Master of Crows, where Martise is on a path to bargain with the Master of Crows and earn her freedom. They have to work together to figure out what's destroying their world and fall in love on the way. I remember like crying at the end of this book, or like near the end of this book. I remember it being just so beautiful and such a wonderful story. I think if you've not read Master of Crows, it's one of her earlier works, if not her first work. So maybe check it out if you've read everything else by Grace Draven. And of course, I have to mention Radiance because that book is everything. I want to do a reread of that one and the sequel, Eidolon, and then the Ippos King, because I would like to be caught up with the series at some point, but I really want to reread all of them. Radiance did things to me that I didn't know was possible. You know, I would not have thought that a spare heir and a niece of a king resigned to this fate of marrying each other, but meeting before they even know it's each other and like having this delightful meet cute and banter would do it for me as much as it did. But boy, did it do a lot for me. And they also both think of each other as ugly, and it's just so, it's so good. It's so good. I think Radiance is just one of those top tier fantasy romances that I can't stop. Like, that no one can shut up about, because everyone who reads it, I think, likes it. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out there who did not like it, and that's okay, but it does a lot for me. Then we have a recent one I read, which is Deal with the Elf King by Elise Kova. This one to me read a lot more like a regular fantasy. It is compared to A Court of Thorns and Roses, but it does not have the same writing style as Sarah J Maas, so the readability, like the popcorn readability of it to me was lower, but I still really liked it. It definitely has a little bit more of a fantasy, that high fantasy feel-ish situation. Luella is a healer, and she has to marry the Elf King to help heal their land. It's part of the cycle that happens, and she has to cross the border and marry him and sit on this throne to feed the fairyland. And it's just a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of plot happening. It's kind of it's definitely a slow build, slow burn situation. And it's a nice sizzle of like enemies to begrudging friends to lovers, which I do quite enjoy. And I really liked where the plot went. It definitely has the Hades Persephone vibes, because she gets to go back to the human world for like a month or a couple weeks a year to recharge. And it also has like that Beauty and the Beast vibe going on too, you know, like nobody wants to get sent to the fairy world. But here she is doing it. You know, Luella's out here just doing her best work, and she's really like doing her best to figure out how to break this curse and what's going on. So good. I also want to talk about Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho, which is a older, it came out in like 2015, fantasy romance. It's maybe towing the line with this one, but I do think that more people need to read it. This is about Zacharias and Prunella. Zacharias is traveling around England in a Regency era time that the magic is like vanishing, and he has to figure out why. And then he meets Prunella, who has like all this power, and it's all about them, like him also now fighting for a reform on who gets taught magic and figuring out where all this power is being drained, like where is it going, what's happening. Also delightful banter. Then we have A Promise of Fire by Amanda Bouchette, which is also a classic fantasy romance. I feel like I've seen it making the rounds again on BookTube, and I read this a few years ago as well. And this follows Cat and Griffin. Cat is the kingmaker. She can tell when someone is lying, and Griffin figures out who she is at this like circus thing, carnival, I think a carnival, like that sort of situation. Like she's a fortune teller, and he kidnaps her basically, and it's just her and him bantering and her not taking his shit. It was so fun. I also want to mention a, honestly, book I don't see talked about enough on here for those of us who like fantasy romance, and that is An Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri. This is a, so this is about an empire that's built on the dreams of enslaved gods, and this follows the Mughal, it's Mughal India inspired. And I loved this world immensely. We have like this beautiful imagery. Tasha Suri's writing is like, okay, it is this like world that you were just pulled into, and you can't like, you don't want to leave. I still need to read the sequel, but I adored Empire of Sand. I think, again, the writing was beautiful. The love story in this is phenomenal. Cannot recommend it enough. I just loved the way the world worked, what was going on. They compare it, they say it's for like the people who have read Wrath in the Dawn and City of Brass, and I've read City of Brass, but I can see Wrath in the Dawn. But anyways, Mare is the illegitimate daughter of an imperial governor, and she's exiled. She has an exiled mother, and the magic she inherits, she's like trying to figure this out. There's just, this book. This is like, it's a debut too, and it's just so strong. Cannot wait for her next book to come out, which is like a sapphic one, and I think book 2 might be sapphic as well. Don't quote me on it. But if you have not checked out Empire Sands, y'all need to check out Empire Sands. Alright, and then of course I'm gonna wreck you, ACOTAR. If you haven't read A Court of Thorns and Roses, do you even like fantasy romance? But no, for real, it's so good. It is the popcorn fantasy that I like sometimes, which is what I like to call it. It's basically very, very readable, very easy to read, very digestible. Nothing's that complicated. If you find yourself intimidated by big fantasy worlds, ACOTAR has you covered. All right, shall we talk about what's on my radar? All right, y'all. So my radar slash pseudo TBR for next month with this is the following books. So I don't know a lot about them because, again, they're on my radar. I don't want to know too much before I go in. So I would like to read From Blood and Ash by Jennifer L. Armentrout. I believe the third and final book in this trilogy is coming out this spring. So if I can read book 1, I can get to book 2 and 3 and be done with it all. I know that Poppy's a maiden, Hawk's a guard / bodyguard, and I know that like it's a bodyguard romance kind of, and she has to be protected, but maybe she doesn't want to inherit this thing she's gonna inherit. That's all I got. I don't know much about it. Everyone won't shut up about it, so I was like, okay, I guess I'll read it. Then we have The Winter King by C.L. Wilson. This is about a king who wants revenge by marrying one of his enemy's daughters, but little does he know, or she know, that her marrying him is going to grant her a freedom she's never had. She gets to escape the shadow of her father, and it's basically more freedom than punishment. And I just can't wait. I love this cover. It's stunning. It reminds me of like vintage fantasy romance covers, and I love that. Next, we have Death's Dancer by Jasmine Silvera. This one maybe borders on paranormal or urban fantasy, but this is a about Azalea, who's a dancer that can summon the gods. This is why I'm feeling like it's more fantasy romance, because gods to me usually imply fantasy. And she ends up in a position working for a necromancer so she can save her family, but her body's also degrading. Things happen. I've had this on my Kindle for a while and I really, really want to read it. Then we have The Blacksmith Queen by G.A. Aiken, which is on Kindle Unlimited currently. And this is about a prophecy that brings war, and Keely must join the mountain warriors, who are really centaurs, to battle in the war. My bestie read this and said it was really good and recommended it to me, so I'm gonna pick it up. I've read other G.A. Aiken books that are dragon books and really liked them, so I'm curious to see what I think of The Blacksmith Queen. Last but not least is Fortuna Sworn by K.J. Sutton. I've never read this. I've wanted to read it for a while. I've seen it wrecked all over the place, and I'm excited to dive in. So Fortuna is working to make ends meet and try and find her brother. She catches the eye of a fairy. She agrees her safe life in the human world to... She agrees to trade her safe life in the human world to go into fairy, and it's been described as a Court of Thorns and Roses and Cruel Prince mashup, and I personally am super here for evil fairies, because I don't think we portray fairies as cruelly as we should. Because if you know any of the Fae legends and the Fairfolk legends, y'all, they're bad. They're bad news. You don't invite them into your home, okay? Don't ever. Don't do it. Don't do it, please. Protect yourself. Don't do that. Anyways, those are what's on my radar for this month's reading and some recommendations. Let me know if you like fantasy romance. What one's your favorite? If it's one I didn't mention, especially because I would like to add more to my radar. And leave a fairy emoji in the comments if you don't want to leave any book recs. That's totally chill too. You can find links to all of these books in the description box down below, and links to all of my social media platforms. You also can find the Romance YouTubers Discord down there if you want to come hang out with me and a bunch of other romance YouTubers and readers of romance. I will see y'all in my next video. Bye.
Really asking, we'll get away to a place where we don't know.